Sao Paulo, Brazil, one of the greatest races on the calendar. A challenging track and a challenging race with variable weather conditions. Let's take a look at some of the hard work that's still going on the paddock, despite the fact this is towards the end of the season. Coming up, we decide if Red Bull is ready to party again. We see what the guys in green and black have got going on. And we work out which update that McLaren is using to get back to the front. Well, that gives us plenty to talk about on this edition of Tech Talk, and I don't think we really have time to get into anything else. I'm joking, of course. We promised you a little bit of action from the Haas F124, and we deliver on our promises. Let's have a little look at some of the gorgeous and intricate details on the Haas car. But first, a little bit of a reminder how Haas operates. It's the smallest team in Formula One, and its form in some recent seasons hasn't been the best, but that does mean it has a generally quite high aerodynamic testing allowance. Don't forget, every team in F1, based on their Constructors' Championship finishing positions in 2 points of the year, it resets in the summer, they are given an allowance of how much wind tunnel and CFD time they're allowed to use. The worse you're performing, the more aerodynamic testing you're allowed. Well, Haas have had quite a chunk of aerodynamic testing, and that means their car is gorgeously intricate, but not always at the front of the pack. And quite often I feel that's a bit of a shame because it gets overlooked. The Haas team has a unique approach to how it develops its car. It buys almost all of the mechanical components from Ferrari, and it designs the car across 3 different sites. A small team in the USA, in North Carolina, a team in the UK, and teams in Italy, some located at Dallara, where the cars and a lot of the parts are actually manufactured, and a team at Ferrari, where the wind tunnel work is done as well. And that relationship with Ferrari has led to some, shall we say, Ferrari-inspired components. And I think the first one of these to take a look at, it's one that's not new on the car, and they've had it all season, going back actually a couple of seasons now, are these sticky uppy bits on the front wing. These slot gap separators, as they're officially called, are something that was actually first introduced by Mercedes in Austin in 2022. Then they took them off the car because they thought they were going to be banned. The FIA did a rule change and they were very definitely allowed. Ferrari reintroduced them, used them extensively that year, and then throughout the rest of that season, Haas started to use them and have stuck with them ever since. And in fact, they're the only team to stick with them. Everybody else has abandoned them, but Haas, they like it. And those sort of aerodynamic, intricate details are one of the reasons I like the current generation of Haas designs. But the area that's probably the most exciting on the Haas, and it's not particularly new, but I thought we really should highlight it on this show, is this section here, where the front wing elements join the front wing end plate. Now, if you remember when the 2022 regulations were first introduced all the way back in 2021 at Silverstone, the blending between those front wing elements and the end plate was a very smooth design. Haas, though, clearly didn't get the message. Look at this for intricate design. They've built elements on elements on elements sticking out from the inner face of the front wing end plate, taking huge advantage of an area of technical freedom that only really emerged at the start of the 2023 season, and some people were running small little winglets in this area. Haas, though, have taken it to a new level, with every element of the front wing being sculpted, looking to generate a little bit of outwash looking at it, but even some of these inner parts sticking up from the front wing, you're getting back to the old 2021, even 2020 levels of aerodynamic complexity on these parts, and that's just because Haas have had so much time to play around with their CFD and in the wind tunnel. When you take a look at this section from a different angle, it really is quite extreme. You can see how the team are playing with the airflow. Look how sculpted that is. It's ridiculous. It's quite wonderful to see that sort of innovation, that sort of technical development on the cars at this point of their maturity. And of course, all of that knowledge, well, the knowledge never goes anywhere, but all of that specific design, well, that goes in the bin at the end of next season, because the 2026 cars are upon us and the regulations on that part of the car are going to be very, very different. But I'm getting ahead of myself and ahead of the technical regulations. Looking at the side of the Haas, well, they had a natty new paint job in Austin with a patriotic eagle on the side of the car. They also had some revisions to the floor edge and some clever bits that we couldn't see underneath the floor. Seems to have worked quite well. Haas starting to score points like one of the front of the midfield teams, and that could have a dramatic impact on the Constructors' Championship points, taking points off other teams and moving Haas up. the Constructors' Championship. And that means we may see a little bit less of this sort of intricacy on the rear end of the Haas next season. They may not have the aerodynamic testing budget to be able to come up with crazy solutions like this rear cluster of brake duct winglets. It doesn't look too bad there. When you see it from another angle, it looks like they've gone down to the wing shop and bought, yes, everything. And just look at the number of different elements on that little cluster behind the rear brake duct inlet and outlet. Just lovely bit of design there, lovely bit of work from the Haas team. So I think there's still a lot more to see on the Haas VF24 and the VF25, but that car for me just is absolutely full of aerodynamic detail. But one team that has struggled in terms of its technical development and struggled from what we're hearing with the cost cap, partly down to some big accidents, causing some damage to some chassis and pushing them up against the wall of the cost cap, is Mercedes. The drivers have been struggling around Interlagos with some bouncing around the track on their practice laps, both George Russell and Lewis Hamilton complaining of a rough ride in Brazil. They are running out of opportunities to develop their car. Toto Wolff's been pretty clear in the media saying they can't really bring any new parts to the car because they'll be breaching the cost cap if they do, or at least they're coming too close to it to be comfortable. And that means development on this car has kind of come to its conclusion. And all of Mercedes' efforts now have turned to the 2025 car, which could be quite different after the struggles they've had with the unpredictability of this year's Silver Arrow. A team that spent a bit of time copying Mercedes between 2023 and 2024 was Red Bull, surprisingly, who installed those high-sided engine covers on both of their cars at the start of the year, but later in the season seemed to have abandoned that in favour of this slightly more conventional layout. However, Red Bull's race form has been dropping off significantly, and Ferrari and McLaren, and at times Mercedes, have been beating the reigning world champions. So to find out what's going on and all of the latest information, we were talking to Paul Monaghan in the paddock.
With this generation of car, they are quite circuit specific. So this place has been resurfaced. It might not be as bumpy as Austin. Clearly we've got a bit more atmosphere to work with than Mexico, slightly less than Austin. So we'll try to set the car up and get the most out of it in kind of one session. We have another go after the sprint race. Just the sprint event in itself makes it quite a different challenge. Doesn't matter what we get out of it, it's how the car performs relative to its opposition really that counts. That's what we're here to do, isn't it?
Yeah, and Max said last weekend that the big problem from his perspective was the race pace. What are you hoping for on this weekend? And I suppose what's the challenge in trying to get what was previously a strength back?
What's the challenge? It'd be better than we've heard last week. It's not that difficult, is it? Right. I think we can apply some decent theories as to what happened to us in Austin we got caught as well, don't forget, and there was a shenanigans at turn 12, wasn't there? So we have got a good idea of what we need to do. It's whether we can execute it well enough that our relative pace is good or better than that of our opposition. And that is a Sunday afternoon challenge. We'll see a little bit of in the sprint race, but I think Sunday will present more difficulties, and we'll see what the weather brings. The forecasts are fairly mixed, so that might mask all of the work we've done. We'll see if we come out good or bad.
What are the plans going forward as well? Because obviously you slipped down to third in the Constructors now, and I'm sure how is the atmosphere
Thanks
within
for
the team
reminder.
right now? Within the team right now to try and claw some of that back.
Mood in the team is fantastic. If you go into the garage, if you can hear yourself over the music, they're a good bunch. We're pulling well, and the fight's still on. If we can get both cars into high point scoring positions, we make it harder for the opposition to then pull away in the Constructors. And that's if we can get two cars in there, maybe we can claw it back. There's still plenty of points on the table to improve. So I'm not shunning the Constructors' Championship in any way. I don't think we need to question the motivation of our Dutch superstar as to whether he's up for defending his Drivers' Championship. So we will present the cars in the best manner we can, to the best of our abilities, and try to extract the most out of them. And then it's based on the opposition that really determines how we prosper at the end of the year.
Well, Red Bull's biggest rival for most of the season, it seems, even though Ferrari have been a bit resurgent of recent races, has been McLaren. And unusually for a sprint weekend, and unusually for the third race in a triple header, McLaren have introduced quite a drastic-looking new rear wing. With only one session to work out whether it actually works or not, a bit of a step for the McLaren team. And you can see the difference here. It's really deeply sculpted in the centre section. Then have a look at the outboard element here, really aggressive, very high. You can see those targets to just check the rear flexibility, fitted to all cars now, and a bit of a big gurney on. So quite an aggressive wing for what is essentially a medium downforce circuit. And if you compare it to McLaren's previous wing iterations, here's the wing from another angle. You can have a look at the wings they used at medium downforce circuits earlier in the year, and look, really different concept. So McLaren trying something quite drastically different with their car for the Brazilian Grand Prix weekend. But when McLaren introduce a new rear wing, it does come with something. And I have to get my book out to check my notes on this, because every time McLaren have changed their rear wing this year, they've also changed their lower beam wing. And the number of lower beam wings that McLaren have introduced this year is a bit ridiculous. There's just been so many of them, and I have to read through this list to you. So there is a new wing this weekend here in Brazil, and this is the section we're talking about here. These elements here that come out around the out from the side of the exhaust and link to the lower section of the rear wing end plate. And because they're quite a cheap part to replace and muck about with, McLaren has introduced just such a run of them in Saudi Arabia, in Miami, in Emilia-Romagna, Imola to everybody else, in Monaco. In Silverstone, there were 3 different variants, not all of which we got clear footage of here. Then we had different versions in Belgium, which the weather meant we didn't get a good look at that either. Then in the Dutch Grand Prix in Zandvoort, they had a different version again. Then in Singapore, and then finally in the USA. So many different variants of rear lower beam wing for McLaren, 12 in total with 21 races for the season already. It's almost one every other race, so they've clearly been playing around a huge amount on the back end of that papaya painted McLaren. But finally, there's a team we haven't talked about enough this season. And for me, this is a team that we do need to mention a bit more. It is the team having the hardest time of the 2024 World Championship. I am, of course, talking about Sauber, who are having their worst season on record. But they too have introduced a new lower beam wing, double element design here, but that's not the most exciting change that they've made on their car. It's actually quite a subtle change. You can't really see it, but it's right here. They've changed their suspension design, not for aerodynamic purposes, but in a way that to improve the grip of the car. The front suspension geometry has been changed by adjusting the outboard pickup point. Now, normally, this means you'd have to change your upright or change your suspension structural parts as well. But the team deny that they've done this. But when we tried to ask them in a little bit more detail about what they've done, they became very cagey very quickly and didn't really want to talk too much about it. But I think this subtle suspension change this late in the season isn't really anything to do with getting a bit more performance and trying to get their first point of the season and their first point in quite a long time. I think this is more about developing next year's car now as the team changes its focus from being Sauber and slowly morphs into the Audi works team ahead of the start of 2026. And a lot of teams now turning their attention to the new generation of Formula One car, but that doesn't mean we're going to miss out on a huge amount of technical developments still to come. The teams aren't allowed to touch their 2026 designs until the 1st of January. So lots of work still to be done all the way up to Christmas and beyond. And I think we're going to see a really exciting start of next season as well. But there's still a lot more to come here from Brazil.